run it along because we've got plenary sessions coming up. So we're going to go straight to Dr. Karleen Gribble. She's there for the affirmative team that breast is no longer best. Yes, I've got that right now. She's an ABA community educator, breastfeeding advocate and researcher at the University of Western Sydney. So, wow, she's tough, gritty. And she's here today. She's got 2 children, but she's going to argue on the affirmative team that because she knows there's nothing special about breastfeeding, that it is nothing more or less than normal. Please make a welcome to the stage, Dr. Karleen Gribble.
Thanks very much, everybody, and thanks very much to the Negative for their outline of the importance of breastfeeding. And of course, they're right. There's no food that's better for babies than for human milk. But let's pause for a moment to examine what it means to say that breastfeeding is best. Best means optimum, ideal, most favourable, ultimate, preeminent, supreme, superlative. It sounds pretty good, doesn't it? But does best describe what we expect in life and most things? Now, who went shopping for clothes before they came here to Hot Milk? Few of you? Now, let me ask, did you pop off to Paris to get the latest fashions from the most exclusive designers and the finest of fabrics? Anybody here? Anyone? No? Didn't do that? Surely you always have the best? Well, maybe you went to your mother or your grandmother and asked her to give you something that she didn't want anymore, something that was daggy, had some stains perhaps and some holes and in a style that was fashionable 20 years ago. Did anybody do that? Oh, I see, that's why you're on the Negative. Well, I imagine that, like me, many of you went to your local shop and looked for nice, reasonable quality clothing that fitted and was affordable and would look good. In fact, we didn't expect to get the best or the worst. We expected to get good enough. And that's the way it is for most things in life. We don't expect to have the best. We understand that often compromises are required. The best is unattainable, and we're usually satisfied with good enough. Well, marketing for infant formula very cleverly positions it as good enough or a satisfactory way of feeding babies. Marketers are extremely happy for breastfeeding to be best, and they proclaim it all over the place. To describe unmodified cow's milk as deficient, and to take the wide middle ground that infant formula is adequate and a normal food to feed babies. I asked the question earlier whether it was valid to compare breastfeeding to other forms of infant feeding. Well, I'd say that it's not only a valid thing to do, but absolutely necessary. However, breastfeeding must be the reference point or control by which we measure alternatives. When breastfeeding is the control, we discover that not only is unmodified cow's milk an inadequate food for babies, but that infant formula also has many, many deficiencies. We discover, for instance, that rather than breastfed babies being healthier, babies who are fed infant formula are sicker, and so are their mothers. But how many are aware of this? How many know that infants who are breastfed are nearly 5 times more likely to be hospitalised in their first year with infections? That a single early exposure to infant formula may initiate a series of immune responses leading to type 1 diabetes? That infants who are not breastfed are more likely to become adults who are overweight, hypertensive, suffer from elevated cholesterol? How many are aware that early weaning increases the risk of a mother developing breast and ovarian cancers, hip fracture, type 2 diabetes and heart attack? It sounds alarming, doesn't it? Well, it is. And it's confronting to look at infant feeding this way, and perhaps that's why we like to talk about breastfeeding as best. It's much more comfortable to do it that way. And perhaps we also expect people to deduce that if breastfed babies are healthier, that means that that infant formula is lacking and that formula-fed babies are sicker. But unfortunately, this just isn't the case, and we've got the research to prove it. A study in the US asked members of the public whether breastfeeding was healthier for babies, and most people agreed that it was. However, half to 3/4 of the same people said that feeding a baby infant formula instead of breast milk did not increase the chances that the baby would get sick. That is, they thought that breastfeeding had health benefits, while simultaneously believing that there were no adverse health consequences to the use of infant formula. Similarly, focus group research found that people did not believe that there were disadvantages associated with not breastfeeding. Rather, they viewed breastfeeding as like supplementing a standard diet with vitamins, and infant formula was understood to be the standard diet. In Australia, breastfeeding rates have remained relatively stable for the last 10 to 15 years or so. However, the use of infant formula has increased. More babies are being mixed fed. The proportion of breastfed babies under 4 months regularly consuming infant formula increased by 64% between 1995 and 2001. Other research found that 90% of 6-month-old babies in their study had received infant formula in the last day. That's almost market saturation, and I find that quite alarming. Our efforts to increase breastfeeding rates have stalled, and the use of infant formula is increasing. Infant formula is promoted as like breast milk and is safe, harmless and nutritious. Why should parents avoid using it if it's benign, if there are no ill effects to its use? We have all become accustomed to think of the benefits of breastfeeding and not to consider that the use of infant formula has any risks associated with it. This mindset has become so ingrained that even when the situation is extreme, individuals are unable to see past the benefits of breastfeeding script. For example, in 2003, we watched with horror as the hurricane hit the city of New Orleans. Mothers and babies were stranded for days. A number of babies died from dehydration. Many were fed plain water, which is just an extremely dangerous thing to do, and we don't know how many suffered from infections that they contracted from contaminated water. But there were babies born during that storm, and they were discharged from hospital into the chaos afterwards. You would think that under these circumstances, health professionals would understand the risks of formula feeding and clearly communicate this to mothers. Well, it seems not. I'll relay an account here that was published in Paediatrics by a doctor who worked in New Orleans, and this is how he described what he did. Because safe drinking water to mix with the formula would be a long time coming, it was truly an optimum time to discharge all infants on breast milk. Even after lengthy discussions of the benefits of breastfeeding, especially now, mothers of the first 3 newborns chose to use formula. These babies, in the arms of their lactating mothers, were discharged from hospital with infant formula provided by the hospital. These mothers were not informed that formula feeding would put their babies' lives at risk. This doctor could not get past the rhetoric he was familiar with. He was only used to talking about the benefits of breastfeeding, and it was all that he had when placed in a situation where formula feeding put babies at immediate risk. It can be difficult to change how we talk, but we must. We can hang on to the benefits of breastfeeding and reframe them to describe why breastfeeding is important. In addition, we must inform parents about the risks of premature weaning from breastfeeding and the use of infant formula, for without this information, they are unable to make informed choices. We must change how we talk about breastfeeding, for while ever we maintain that breast is best, we suppress the importance of breastfeeding to mothers and babies. Mothers and others will consider early weaning or mixed feeding a practice without harm. Pressure to reinstitute widespread milk banking is emasculated, and many of our most vulnerable babies, including a proportion born prematurely or ill, and those infants in out-of-home care, will be further disadvantaged by being deprived of the only nutrition that supports normal health, growth and development. Breastfeeding is not best, it's only normal, but that's not a small thing, and it's something that every mother should know. Breast is no longer best.